Hey guys, welcome to the Improvement Podcast, where the mission is to help young men develop their character, identity, and mindset in order to activate their potential and achieve their goals in life. So, on today's episode, we have on another special guest. His name is Kevin Benevides, and he is a transformational coach. Thank you for coming to the show, Kevin.
Thanks for having me on, Kamani.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Me too, man.
Yeah, so just to give the listeners a little bit more background information about you, could you tell them a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a transformational coach for men, supporting men to sort of master their mind and their emotions, heal from their past so that they can step into their authentic self, their authentic power and potential in their life. So it's working with men one-on-one and in group settings to really get to learn and to discover who they truly are by moving through the obstacles from their past that has covered up, again, their potential, their true self, their ability to be a true healthy male. And so, it's just really a lot of the main things I focus on supporting men with is really becoming more emotionally mature, emotionally intelligent, healing from the stuff from the past that is still holding them back from today. I deal with a lot of men who have issues with people pleasing, or what I would call the nice guy syndrome. So being able to rediscover their self-worth and their confidence, and standing in their true power. It's hard to do that when you don't feel worthy. And therefore we live in certain ways and act in certain ways because we feel unworthy of ourselves as men. And so, those are the things that I really focus in on with my coaching.
Yeah, so it's great that you do that sort of work. One thing I'll say is that, as you know, it's very important, and I think it's something that's extremely needed for a lot of guys. But one question I like to ask you to follow that up is, what was it that made you decide to get into that space? What was the catalyst that made you realize the importance of it and decide that you were going to be the guy to help guys come to those conclusions?
Yeah, great question. It was basically my own personal journey, my own transformation, which started in 2013. To make a long story short, I always lived with anxiety. I just didn't really know it. And then my dad got really sick, and I thought he was going to pass away. And because of that, my anxiety levels skyrocketed, couldn't really function very well for months on end, which brought in depression. And then also the fact that I thought my dad was going to pass away. A lot of stuff from my childhood came up. So it was like an emotional and mental shitstorm, as I say, for like 6 months. And so, towards the end of those 6 months, I made a decision to do something different, and that different was to really take an inner journey within myself to truly heal the root of what was happening. And so that included, mindfulness practices. Mindfulness meditation was huge for me, and then just the person who supported me opened the doors to like spirituality and personal development and all that stuff that I had never even considered or even knew about. And so that just propelled me to my growth and changing my life. And that just continued years on year in and year out. My passion became that. My passion became to become a better man and to share that. I was just so interested in sharing what I was learning. And so that's what I was doing for years and years. I was sharing online, similar to what I do today, but it was just broadly whatever I was dealing with. And then, a couple of years ago, what I really wanted for myself was to not just talk about this online, but to support people one-on-one with this, so that I could support them in their life. And so that's when I thought, I want to be a coach. And then, things went on, and then I've eventually decided, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and make coaching my career. And when I did that, I had to decide, who am I going to support? What am I going to support them with? So I decided men because I think that there is not as many people out there that specifically deal with the issues that men deal with in their life from that perspective, from the male perspective. And basically, there's just what I've gone through is what I support my men with. So that's really the catalyst. The catalyst was my own personal growth and journey, and wanting and my desire and my passion to support other human beings to improve upon themselves in their life.
So I'm sure that a lot of people that do this similar stuff to you, they can probably relate to that. I know I can even relate to a degree because, that was a similar catalyst that I had, my own personal development and getting into doing Himprovement, doing the podcast. But one question I'd like to ask you to kind of follow up a little bit on like your personal journey is I know that you make a lot of content about the father wound and that sort of thing, like not having that emotional availability and that sort of thing and how it affects young guys. And so I wanted to ask, was that something that you felt in that experience you had with your dad whenever his health was declining?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So you talk about the father wound a lot in your content. And something I wanted to ask you was that, did you kind of feel like the same absence whenever your father was going through his health issues?
Yeah, I think the absence was before then, right? Like my whole upbringing. That's why I talked about like things from my childhood came up, because I just like unconsciously was living with these things and they didn't know how it affected me. So the father wound was, what I lacked from him during my childhood, adolescence, right, until I was an adult. And I had a decent relationship with him, but it was just, for me, it was like when he was really sick, I remember the night very clearly, coming home from the hospital and like just breaking down. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my dad. And I never had a dad. That's what really hit me. And I never thought about that. And it's like, of course I had a dad. I've seen him. I see him multiple times a week and stuff. But it was the fact of like what I needed from him as a dad, I never got. And it's like, and now he's going to be gone. At least that was my thinking. And so that's what opened me up to like, what the heck? What am I talking about? Like, what is this? And then all these things from my childhood came up. And it's not that it's not physical abuse or anything like, it's just that neglect of emotions, that neglect of connection. Right. And that's what for me was there. And that's what I had to look into and heal. And because that created who I became. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm sure that a lot of people listening can relate to that. And one thing I'll say is that there are a lot of times there are like, there's a habit work that people will have, even mainly people that haven't had fathers, where they'll find some sort of way to discredit fathers and talk about how they don't offer value that are not necessarily needed. And so, for you to have one, and I can relate, similar situation, getting that emotional neglect, you could say, from my father, being able to look and have a father present and still be able to see, the value that could have been offered, that was supposed to be, and it not being there. I think now being an adult and kind of moving through life, it gives me a better appreciation for what a good father is supposed to be. And it gives me motivation to make sure I provide that to my future kids. I'm sure that you probably feel the same.
100%. I became a father young, in my early 20s, and that was like a driving motivation. It was sort of conscious and a little bit unconscious, of just like, I'm going to be a completely different dad than my dad was for me. And I strived to be that father like that I didn't have. But then the interesting part was when this thing happened in 2013, and as the time went by, I started to realize that actually I became like my dad in other ways that I wasn't even conscious of, like the way that I dealt with my emotions, and I reacted instead of responded, and all these things. And it was just like so interesting to see how I tried so hard to be not like him when I actually became much like him in other ways, right? But yeah, it's interesting for me.
So those habits, I guess you could say, that he had, they ended up getting passed down to you. That's what you're saying.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Some of them. Yeah. Some of them.
Right. And I guess it's not surprising because, kind of reflecting on my own personal situation, I can say, yeah, that neglect that came from my dad, maybe not providing that emotional support that you might need as like a growing kid. It kind of forces you to develop maybe some of those same habits that they're using that are forcing this on you, where, to compartmentalize things or to act like things don't bother you or to get angry, seeing him do those same things and not provide me with the emotional support that I needed. It really left me only the option to pick up those same sorts of habits, I guess you could say. And so when you frame it that way and say that you ended up doing some of those same things, it's really tough because, of course, you talked about not wanting to be that same sort of person, but that's really the only type of stuff that you have in your toolbox at that point, unless like you can consciously pinpoint some of these things you might have picked up that are negative and were able to change them. But, maybe sometimes, especially until you have a kid, you might not realize some of those things are an issue within you until you get put in those tough spots.
Yeah, no, everything I did was unconscious until that time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was already a father for, maybe 5 or 6 years when all the stuff went down with me, and I had no clue how I was. I was living life unconsciously, just living life based on what society and my family said I was supposed to live. And then it was like a smack in the face, right? Like, wow,
Right.
wow, look at it. Look what I'm doing. How I'm behaving. And it's not that I was a horrible man. I was great. I would say I was a great father, but still it's just like, oh, I could do better here. I can, you know what I mean? Just knowing that this is not the best way to go about it, is really what came for me. It was just being able to acknowledge that, okay, I can do better here. And so what is there? How do I do that? What's the steps for that? And at the end of the day, it is parenting. It's not really just parenting, it's parenting yourself. When I was able to reparent myself, then I can parent my kids differently. So
Yeah, it definitely makes sense, and especially if that was before the time you got into the work you do now with your personal development.
yeah.
Really can't blame yourself, because one thing I had to think about and, have some sort of like empathy and forgiveness with was the fact that, even though a lot of decisions that he made, were conscious, the mechanisms in the toolbox, like I said before, using that same term, like looking at my own father, these weren't things where he was, going out of his way to say, I want to have this sort of effect on my kid. And so you kind of have to give yourself the same benefit of the doubt where, hey, you don't know better until you actually learn what's the right thing to do. And then, at that point, if you're deciding not to take those steps to be a better guy and to develop more emotional intelligence, to be more supportive, then that's kind of bad. But when you're ignorant, you're just ignorant, right?
Yeah, I think it's 100% that way. It just, you don't know. Excuse me. You don't. It's not that you're in your awareness, and it's not like you said, not like, oh, I'm doing this purposely to my kids because I want to. No, it's just the way that you operate, the way that you're going through life due to what you've experienced. But it's when that light bulb goes off and you see it, that it's like, then it becomes a conscious choice. But before, it wasn't a conscious choice. And so when you're in this process, it's also important because many of us have done things that now we look back, we're not really proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I even said to a client yesterday is like, if you could have done better, you would have done better. Right? Because he's like, oh, it just like repeating the cycle of that guilt and that shame towards ourselves. And we can't even move forward because we're carrying that burden of like, fuck, I messed up. And look, it's still coming back to bite me. But it's like, yeah, but you're making the changes now. You couldn't make those changes because if you had because the person you are today would not make those same mistakes from the past.
Right.
So in the past, when you made those mistakes, you had no capability of shifting and changing. And some people are like, well, that's a cop out or just an excuse to do bad things. No, it's not. But it's when we look back and we're in this journey of healing and growing and becoming a better man, we need to be able to do that, to really just have that perspective of like, hey, I did the best that I could, but look where I am right now. Look what I'm choosing to do right now. And that's what's important. Because today, when I look at this, I'm on a different path than what I was before. And when you're able to have that acceptance, acceptance brings forgiveness. You cannot have forgiveness if you cannot accept that thing that happened. So if you can accept yourself and accept who you were and what you did, then that leads you to eventually being able to forgive yourself. We have to accept, hey, I messed up. I didn't do better. I know I didn't do better, but it is what it is. Like, I have to accept that happened. And instead of just like, I wish it was different. Look what I did. And you just continue that negative dialogue within yourself, right? Beating yourself up. So yeah, I think that's really important in that journey, right? When you start to recognize these things, is just having some compassion and understanding towards yourself.
Hey, I love that. And the reason why is because I felt the same way once I started to come to these realizations, and I started to notice how maybe some of my shortcomings in my development were affecting the people that I cared about around me. I started to think back on some of those instances where I probably hurt people and failed them. I don't have kids, but so I guess, luckily it hasn't happened to my kids, but just thinking about some of the ways that I felt the people around me that cared about me, it definitely did make it to where I was pretty guilty, and it took a while to get over some things. But now that I'm working through that process to be a better man, it's something that I was able to be at ease with eventually. And so I appreciate you mentioning that. And so to help the guys that, might be dealing with similar situations, but maybe don't have that awareness, I think something that'd be really helpful is if we could define or talk about maybe some of the traits or the signs, that somebody might have a father wound. And so if you don't mind, could we kind of maybe drill down into that and maybe talk about some of the specific things that people might be able to look at and say, that's something I might be able to relate to?
Yeah, some of the signs is, well, first is your relationship with your emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're emotionally unavailable, emotionally reactive, I can almost guarantee you that dysregulation with your emotions, that disconnection with your emotions, is because you didn't have a healthy father figure to teach you. Perhaps you had a father figure that taught you, that men just blow up, or that you don't deal with your emotions, all that masculine, like the masculinity sort of perception, right?
Right.
So if you're living in those ways today, where you don't, you have this idea of what masculinity is, and it's not helpful, it's not helping you, perhaps there's a father wound there. One aspect of a father wound that many people in general, and especially specific men, don't think about is when you become that nice guy, when you are that people pleaser, there is a big opportunity or chance that you had a father wound, because the nice guy becomes a nice guy because one of the reasons is because he didn't have that father figure to teach him how to be a man and how to live life that way. And then because whether you had him, whether he was physically present, or whether he was physically present or not physically present, but if he wasn't there again the way that you needed him to, or you saw that what he did was hurting others, and so you decided, I'm not going to be like my dad because I don't, he's causing pain to me, to my mom, to these other people. Like, you can see that whatever the way he's living, he's not a role model. When you're a kid, you're like, I don't want to be like dad. So you associate masculinity or being a man as bad. So you sort of cut yourself off to that part of yourself. And then what you do is and if you don't have that loving connection with him, you still need that loving connection. So what do? You turn to the women in your life. And so now all you do is you learn to get that love and approval and acceptance from the females in your life. And then as you grow up, that's how one of the one of the main reasons why men people please is because they're trying to change who they are so they get the approval and validation and love from the women, from the females. And so if you're living as a nice guy, there's almost a guarantee that there's some sort of father wound there. But there's so many, there is so many different ways. Like if you have a hard time with anger, we talked about, or I talked about emotions in general. But if you have a hard time with dealing with your anger, where did that anger come from? Could it come from, again, your father, right? What you got or you didn't get, what you saw or you didn't see happen, and that builds up over time. And so that built up of anger that comes out so easily could come back to the fact that you have a father wound. Even a lack of confidence could be that. It could be even like people who are trying to be successful, right? I'm just going off the top of my head of these list of different things. Some men who try to be successful and, get all the money and the big cars and all these things, or the business, and have the successful business, they're doing that because they want to get the validation from their father, who is probably still around, that they never got when they were younger, which is a father wound. So they're acting in ways and they're living in ways to still get the love that they never got from their dad. Or maybe their dad was success oriented, and that's the only way they got love from them, was when they did something good, when they achieved something when they were younger. So now they're trying to achieve still in their life, because if I achieve, of course it's not conscious, but unconsciously, if I achieve, then maybe my dad will give me the love that I'm looking for.
So you could really sum it up to say it's like a sense of inferiority, where guys feel like they need to prove themselves in some sort of way, whether it's acting in the macho way, or, from getting approval from others, maybe their father, or from women in a certain type of way, just trying to have something that makes them feel like they're worthy, I guess you could say.
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think, again, it's like it's a big one, is the disconnection from your emotions, an inability to deal with your emotions in healthy ways. I think a lot of that stems from not having, again, that role model, that male role model of how to deal with that stuff, right? How to deal with your emotions. And I think it's just the pain, right? Like if you're addicted, right? If you have addictive, like if you have an addictive personality, in a sense that you go and you're using something over and over and over again to cope with what you're dealing with in your life, again, that the root of that could come back to your father wound. So much of what we deal with at the end of the day, it comes from where, our first relationship was with our mom and with our dad. And again, this is not to blame our parents. This is not, doing any of that stuff, but you have to get to the root of whatever you're struggling with in your life right now. The important is always getting to the root. The important thing is always getting to the root. And again, the root will be where life started in your childhood, and what you saw and what you learned from those people. And so, I talk about the father wound on my page, but for the most part, men that reach out, they don't go to me, hey, I got a father wound. I need to heal this. Some do. Some say, I know that I have a really bad relationship with my dad, and this is affecting my life. There are the few that say that. But for the most part, they talk about their confidence. They talk about their addictions. They talk about the fact that they're not emotionally available for their partner. And so then when we start dealing with that, for me, I have to get to the root. And so when we work our ways backwards, it always comes back to father or mother wound, right? And then healing from that is what's important. So I went on a tangent. I completely forgot where
you're good. You're good. No, we're still on track. Yeah, but something else that popped into my head when you were talking about the approval from women is, I feel like a lot of times people touch on like the nice guy side of that, where, oh, let me, shape shift and be this person, that's, that never creates conflict or anything like that, so that way I can get, that pat on the back and feel like a good guy, and like, I'm not as bad as how my dad is. People always talk about that. But one question I wanted to ask you, since this is like an area you work in, is do you think that it could be a sign of a father wound too if guys kind of take like the opposite end of that spectrum, where like they get that validation from women, but they do it like, let's say you're like using women and like, having sex with a lot of women, like trying to run
Yeah.
up their body count, that sort of thing?
Oh yeah. Same thing, just different ways that they're approaching it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think at the end of the day, you can say it's a father wound or a mother wound, but if you look at that, why the need to, in this instance, why the need to sleep with so many women for all that stuff? What are you trying to get out of that? Right? You're trying to find a sense of worthiness and love, attachment, connection, something that you don't have with yourself. Because if you had it with yourself and you can respect yourself and love yourself, then that's going to ripple outward, and you're not going to behave in those ways that you're behaving. So at the core of a lot of our issues is just the fact that we don't love ourselves. We don't feel worthy. We don't have that connection with self. We have that disconnection. We're like cut off to the depths of who we are, and connecting again. If you can't connect to your emotions, you're not connecting to a big part of who you are as a human being. And if we go back to the whole, what society has taught us, or our culture for the past, I don't know, maybe 100 years of what it means to be a man, if you're living in those ways and thinking and believing that, men don't talk about their emotions, they don't express their emotions other than, anger is good, but we don't express other emotions, we don't get vulnerable, all that stuff, you're cutting yourself off from a part of who you are. And so therefore you can't even have that healthy relationship with yourself. So then you're trying to find that outside of you, right? You're trying to validate your existence, your worth, by like these different things, which one of the ways is, like you said, sleeping with a lot of women.
One thing you said too that stuck out to me is, developing that relationship with yourself. But one thing I would think too is that by you not having, let's say, those skills or whatever, that, strong sense of self, it also affects you in your relationships that you have outside of you. I feel like it makes it extremely tough to have relationships with other healthy, productive people if that's an issue that you have. And it seems as though like when that part of you isn't fixed, or, you aren't working on it, it pretty much relegates you to only meeting, I won't say low quality people, but, you aren't able to maximize your relationships.
Like will attract like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens. And so we have issues, like even some men have issues with intimacy and being vulnerable, right? That why we have intimacy issues, or we're afraid of intimacy. Some men are, right? Well, because we haven't been intimate with ourselves. We haven't been intimate with our fears, right? With our past, with our pain. So because that we lack that connection, it's hard to do it outside too, with others. So it always comes back to us first. When we can work on our inner world, our connection with ourselves, everything ripples out, right? Then you do attract other people into your life, not just intimate relationships, but friendships, right? When you shift, when you step into this path of growth, be prepared for people to leave your life, or that you will leave their lives, because who you become you don't vibe in the same, right? Either they'll be like, why
Who
aren't
is
you
this guy,
liking,
right?
yeah, who is this guy? And like, why don't you like the same things? Or it's you are going to be like, I just don't feel right in this environment anymore. It's not that you're better than them. It's just your interests, your values have shifted. So therefore you're like, okay, this just doesn't vibe with me anymore. I'm not going to spend time with these people. And then because of who you are and what you do and where you're surrounding yourself, you're going to attract those people who are also in that same vibe, right?
Right.
In that same area in your life. And that's one of the things that comes up, questions that I get with my clients when I start working with them. It's like, do I have to expect losing people in my life? Like, in a way, yeah, it could happen, but you don't know, right? We can't just make that assumption, but it's something that really does happen when you work on yourself. People will naturally fall off, and that's not a bad thing, because for you to, it's not that you'll like, leave me alone, I don't want to see you anymore. It's just, again, it just doesn't, like, you're going to be around each other, it's just not going to work anymore. But do you rather just not be at your best to keep that person?
All right, guys, so we have to take a quick break, but we'll go ahead and hop back into it. All right, so what were you saying?
I was about to say, so we see what we're going to lose, but we never see what we're going to gain, right?
Right.
We're afraid of what we're going to lose, the people in our lives and all these things, but we don't realize what we're going to gain, in the sense of like better relationships, better opportunities. We're always looking at the negative and never the positive. And then another thing that I also want to reiterate for anyone is the fact that you could be the catalyst. Your change, your transformation, your growth could be the catalyst to the people in your life's change, like your family members, your friends, for their shift, their change, because they'll see it in you. You're a living example of what's possible now. And if they're in the right spot in their life, they might see, wow, if he can make these changes, maybe I can too, right? So you become sort of like a role model. It's not that you're doing this for that, but that's something we don't realize. It's not that we say, hey, look, I shifted, come and do this. I've made these changes, you come and do it. No, everybody's on their own path, but you never know who you're going to inspire, right? So again, It's like, where are you looking? How are you looking at these things? And if you want to stay and keep those friends, that's fine. It's not that you have to let go of anyone, but you have to choose, like, again, does this connect with who I am right now, with where I am at, right? Because sometimes, and some people are in your life just because they can get things out of you, because they're sort of using you. It's not a conscious thing. It's not something that we communicate. But once you no longer give them what they actually wanted out of you, then they're like, they don't want you around because they were only using you. And so then you actually truly see who your friends are, who your close connections are.
Right.
So
I can definitely see where you're coming from.
It's an interesting issue or topic overall, but at the end of the day, it's focus on you and just look at the positives. Like, look at what you're going to gain in so many different areas, and let that guide you, right?
Right. One thing about it is that a lot of these same relationships that maybe some of those nice guys might want to preserve, most of the time they probably aren't even getting what they want from them anyway. Because I've read a book, and you probably read it too, called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. And one of the things that he mentions is that these nice guys think that, hey, by me always doing what I think other people want me to do, eventually they're going to go and return the favor. And he talks about in the book that it never does happen. And so these guys they get frustrated. They're like, what's going on? Like, I'm, revolving my whole world around making you happy, and you don't do this. You don't read my mind and do like this one thing for me. And that was something that really kind of stuck out to me. I thought was pretty crazy. It's like, yeah, they really shouldn't be worried about these relationships that much, because you're not even getting anything from them anyway. You're the one that's always reaching out to the people. They're always the ones asking you to do favors for them. You're never getting any sort of benefit from this. And they talk about the nice guys in relationships. They talk about how they do all these things thinking that this is going to make their wife want to have sex with them, and most of the time that's not the case. But
then the resentment builds, the anger builds. This is a huge thing that I deal with. Like, this is like my thing. Actually, I have there's a group that I'm specifically coaching of guys that's what we're dealing with. It's just the nice guy, and being the nice guy or breaking free from it. And what you're talking about there is a big part of that is these secret agreements, or from the book they call it covert contracts, where we're unconsciously going through our life doing things we're giving to get. We're not giving because we're giving because out of the goodness, the goodness out of our heart. We're doing it because if I do these things, you're going to give me this back. But that person doesn't know that. You never communicated that. And like you said, I'll do all these things so that my wife sleeps with me tonight. And then she doesn't. And then the next day goes on, and the next week goes on. And then that's where the conflict starts, because you're doing all these things thinking, well, you should know that if I do these things, it's because I want this back. But you never say anything. And so again, anger, resentment, conflict starts. It's all because, well, one, you've mainly you've hidden your truth, right? Like you've hidden your motives or your why you're doing things. So the important part is, if that is your need, speak it. Learn to speak it. But we can't, as the nice guy, when you're living as the nice guy, it's hard for you to do that because you have a fear of rejection and abandonment and conflict, right? And so so it's hard for you to do that. But that is the steps that you have to take, is to be able to start voicing and being responsible for your needs. So it doesn't mean that you're going to stop doing the dishes or cooking dinner or whatever it is, the thing that you did to get what you wanted. But you're not doing it to get something back. You're doing it because that's what you want to do. Right?
And they should stop doing it with that need to be liked as well. Like thinking, oh, okay, if I do this, then maybe people will feel a certain type of way about me. Because I think one thing it talks about in the book too, and I could be just phrasing it in my own way, but it's very hard to like actually have like a genuine attraction and like for a person. I'm talking about in friendships and relationships, if that person has no sort of polarity to them. And the thing about a nice guy is that they never have polarity. They always try and stay like in like those safe ground in the middle. And while it won't necessarily make somebody dislike you, there's nothing there for them to actually attract to, kind of like a magnet, like how it has to be polar for other magnets to attract to it. You don't have anybody actually sticking on and latching on to you. So if the nice guy, probably stops talking to this friend or that friend, they probably won't even know the difference. They probably won't even think to even reach out to that person again if the nice guy isn't the one texting them.
100%, because he was the one that was always trying to make the connections and fit in. And one thing that I noticed in my past from being the nice guy, so I call myself a recovering people pleaser, a recovering nice guy, is the fact that I'll try to blend in with every group. Doesn't matter. Like, even if I look back in my high school years, like I would literally go to one group of friends and be a certain way, and then I'd go the athletes, and then I'd go to the it's a hard thing to say, but like the nerds, and you know what I mean, like go to all these different groups and just be different so that I'll be accepted in that group, but I'm not even being myself. So this happens as life goes on, as you go through different stages in your life, and it's just, you're just different with everyone. So nobody really knows who you are, right? And well, nobody knows who you are because in part you don't even know who you are. But again, you can't create those real good connections and friendships because you'll do anything for them to just like you. And then, if you're no longer doing, again, similar to what I said earlier, if you're no longer doing those things, they don't need you anymore, in a sense, right? Or maybe they don't need you. There's no value in you being around them. So that's what comes into play. But I think what's important is that you stay true to yourself. And I'm sort of going to go off on a tangent, but it's just coming up because, again, it comes up with so many of my clients is we're not true to ourselves. So we're not true to what we feel, what we think, what our opinions are, what we want, our desires. And we don't do that because, again, we don't want to be disliked and be abandoned and not loved and all these things. And we think, oh, if I just not share this and just go with what this person says and agree with this, then everything's going to be okay. And I won't create that conflict. But what's actually happening is you're creating more conflict in the long run than if you were just to speak your truth. When you suppress what your truth is, and then I'll put the umbrella of truth as your thoughts, your opinions, your desires, your needs, your emotions, what's true for you. When you suppress that, the problems that it causes is crazy amount of problems in your life, within yourself and within your life. Because we're trying to avoid something, but you're actually creating it even worse off. And so it's just getting into that practice for that person who resonates with this is, can you lean into that discomfort of speaking your truth? Because it's uncomfortable to be ourselves, right? You have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, and we're uncomfortable with being ourselves. And so can we lean into that and, share that opinion, or say, hey, this is what this made me feel, or whatever that thing is, and start to see what happens because of that. Obviously, start to see what's happening within you when you go to speak your truth, and see what happens as a result of you speaking your truth, and see what shifts, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, so that's great. So we've touched on some pretty valuable stuff in this. I think the guys will get a lot of value from this conversation. And one more question I'll ask you to close that part of it out is for those guys that, let's say, have that father wound, think that they do, or those guys that suffer from nice guy syndrome that feel like they're doing everything for everybody else, but it's not being reciprocated. What would you say is the first step that they should take to making a change?
First is always going to be awareness, acknowledgement, right? Okay, like anything that we talked about today, are you like, wow, yeah, that's me. That sounds familiar. Okay, that's awareness. Now you have a choice. Awareness brings choice. So with that awareness, now you have a choice. Am I going to make a change now? So once you know it's there and it's not supporting the life you actually want, it's not helping you, then make that decision to do something. And then what's the first thing to do? There is so many different avenues you can go to, but I think really is important is start to see how this is playing out in your life. Become really self-aware. Self-awareness is huge for me.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the mindfulness piece, right? Become mindful so that you can separate yourself, so you can create that space between your thoughts and your actions, between your emotions and your reactivity, between your actions and yourself, right? Creating that space is important so that you can start to see, oh shit, even if it's afterwards, even if it's after you do that thing, even if it's after you blow up in anger, maybe it's after you said yes to something you wanted to say no to, saying, oh shoot, I did that thing again.
Mm-hmm.
And that awareness helps you close the gap, right? And then helps you make a new choice. But then to actually make those choices, it's hard to do on your own when you've never learned about these things. So obviously is educating yourself, whether it's reading books, going online, Instagram, any social media platform. You can find coaches, therapists, start to learn about these things for yourself so that you see the tools that you need to do to take the steps. And of course, therapy, coaching, all that, men's groups, all that's going to support you greatly to taking the steps forward. But you have to be aware of what you're doing and make the decision to make a change. And just be ready for that change not to be overnight, right? We always want things to just happen like this, but just know this is a journey. But every step that you take, even small step, even like researching something, you're taking a step forward. And so just being open to that is really important for me. And then again, when you can start making these shifts within you, everything outside starts to shift for the better. And it might not seem like it's for the better at first, but it will, right? It will happen. It will come.
All right. Thank you for that. And last question I'll ask you before we close out, and this is unrelated to what we were talking about before,
No worries.
but
Yeah.
what would you say is the best piece of advice that someone has ever given you?
That's a good one. That's a good one. Best piece of advice I was ever given. The one that pops up, maybe it's not the best, but the one that's coming up right now is that the old you has to die for the real you to come to life or to be born. That was so like, right, the old part of ourselves that's not supporting you, that has to die. It has to be relinquished, let go of. And that's the journey of the transformation, of the growth that we're talking about a lot in this interview, is being able to let go of that old version of yourself, to step into who you truly are. It's not really the new version of yourself. It is new because you haven't seen it, others haven't seen it. But for me, it's getting to the core of who you are, right? Everything is covered up. Our authentic self, who you truly are as a man, as a human being, is in you. You're not really, the personal development is the wrong word. We're not developing anything. It's undeveloping. We're unlearning. We're removing the things that don't serve us, that are not true to us, so that who we truly are can come forward.
It sounds like something I heard from Fight Club, where he said self-improvement, that's not really a thing, but self-destruction, that's like where you actually make progress. It kind of reminded me of that. And when you said like personal undevelopment, it made me think, yeah, I guess you're right. You're breaking down who you knew yourself as, right? You're destroying that old person, and then you're having to rebuild the new one from there. So it makes sense. Yeah, I like that. Personal undevelopment. That's the first time I heard someone say that.
Yeah, we're not really developing. And if you're developing, you're just creating another part of yourself that's not true, really. Right? If you're trying to like shift your personality, no, your personality is not who you are. Your personality is a persona. It's a mask you've been wearing. We have to drop that personality and step into who we truly are. We are authentic. We are unique. When we are authentic, we are unique. It's not that we're going to be like everyone else, but there's something that's true to you that doesn't need you to follow what others say, do what others do. It's coming back to home. I always touch back here, my heart, it's home for me. What's right for me, and being able to live that truth. And for me, it's just peeling off the layers. That's why, the brand that I put together, it's the canvas within. You have a masterpiece within you. There's a canvas, there's a piece of art, and you are that piece of art. But we don't see that. We don't see that part of ourselves because we're covered, right? All these layers of all these paint strokes and all these stuff cover up who we are. And what we're doing in the undeveloping is removing the layers, one layer at a time, so that more of the actual canvas shows through. And that's you, right? You're the canvas. So yeah, that's the name of the game for me. That is the name of the game for me.
Like, I love it. And I appreciate you sharing that. And for the guys that are listening that would like to find you, where should they go?
Right now, it's just my Instagram page. So at the canvas within. I also have a page called at the man within, which is like specific the men's work. So those two pages, but mainly the canvas within is the one that I'm actively using right now. Or you type in Kevin Benevides. I'm on Facebook as well. And soon I'm in the process of getting my website together. So that will be available soon. But right now, Instagram, Facebook, best way to get a hold of me.
All right. Thank you for that. So that pretty much wraps things up. Pretty good episode. I love the interview. I love the topics that we talked about, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, Kevin.
You too, man. I appreciate it. And I enjoy the conversation as well, man.
All right. Thank you.